Hey guys, we are here on day 34, wrapping things up almost. We've got maybe today and tomorrow for some topics, and we are, just about through all of our content. Just a couple reminders. You had some assignments for this particular unit. I put the day that you can find them on if you haven't gotten those to me. Those are due this Friday, so make sure that you are on top of those. Get those to me before the final exam. If you did not watch day 33's video, you'll want to go back and review quickly these programs. We're going to talk about why these programs are extremely difficult to cut spending. And again, if you getting into what we were talking about back on day 33, the the budget deficit that our economy, or I'm sorry, that our government faces, we're up to $26.8 trillion. And the big thing is we have to pay a lot of money on that debt, right? We have to pay interest payments, which is basically credit card bills. So anyway, if you didn't learn about these, I would go back and quickly review those from the day before. Okay, so we have two types of spending that our government is responsible for. So notice that on the mandatory spending, okay, I list all those programs that I basically just told you to go back and review, right? So mandatory spending is spending set by law, okay? Now, quick review. To get a law passed in our Congress, okay, in our country, the House of Representatives has to agree on it. If they can agree on it, then the Senate has to agree on it. If the Senate can vote for it with a majority, then the president has to agree on it as well. Those of you that follow politics currently know that it's very difficult to get everybody to agree on things in our government right now. So changing the law is extremely challenging. And so to change how much money people get for Social Security or Medicare and Medicaid and even unemployment insurance and other welfare programs, the government would have to change that law. Now, here's the next kind of tricky part. A politician's number one goal has to be to get elected. And so to get elected, they've got to satisfy the people. They've got to convince the people that what they want to do is the best. And so let's just say that I am trying to cut into this spending deficit that our government is dealing with. So I say, you know what, we're going to cut Social Security in half. Or let's just say I was going to cut Medicare in half. We are affecting, in those particular situations, old people for the most part, okay? Remember, you got to be 65 to qualify for Medicare. Social Security is up to about 66, 67 years old, depending on the year you're born. And not just old people, but other people too. So if I do that, right, if I'm going to say that I'm going to do that, I have to get elected, okay? Well, the challenge is that old people vote most reliably, meaning that they show up all the time. It's always the old people voting. Young people are not very dedicated voters. And so I've got to satisfy the old people. If I'm running for office, I've got to satisfy the old people to be able to get elected or re-elected in the case of if we change laws during one of my tenures in office, right? One of my terms. And so it's extremely difficult to, like I said, justify cutting some of that spending. Okay, so whatever you cut it from, right? Whether you cut it from Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, even in the case of like military spending. Okay, it's going to be difficult to justify that, but we'll get to military spending here in a second. Okay, so those are the mandatory spending programs. If I qualify for those programs and the government doesn't have any money, I have to borrow it. Okay, and that's where that budget deficit comes from that we talked about yesterday. Now, discretionary spending, a little bit different. Discretionary spending is not set by law. Okay, this is not set by anything that is binding by having to change the law. And the biggest of this category is military spending. We spend about $700 billion a year on the military right now. very close to very. We spent $1 trillion on Social Security, about 700 billion on Medicare, 700 billion on military, and then obviously Medicaid and unemployment a little smaller of a percentage. But anyway, that's the biggest one. Historically, in the last 10 years, when we've had to cut spending, military spending is what has been decreased, and that has its own challenges too. Simply because not only does the military obviously protect us, but the military also creates jobs, whether it's jobs for servicemen or whether it's jobs for companies that provide the military with the equipment that they need. So it's there's a catch 22 there on as far as, hey, yeah, we really want to cut spending, but who do we take it from? So it's pretty challenging. That's one of the reasons why there hasn't been too much progress with it. Just a little bit of a different visual for you here. Okay, we've got a couple different graphs, obviously. This graph's probably the easiest to see. Okay, so our revenues from 2019 are 3.5 trillion. Remember, revenues is basically tax collection. Now, here's what we spend money on, okay? And this is in a bar graph way, okay? So mandatory spending wise, we spend 2.7 trillion. Our discretionary is only 1.3 trillion, right? And then we have our credit card bills that we've got to pay also, okay? So again, most of our spending comes from mandatory spending. If you look at your graph up here, all of this is considered mandatory spending. Okay, so that is what we would have to change the law to be able to change anything. Your other category here, that's going to be like unemployment insurance, some other welfare programs, and things like that. So, again, notice in our discretionary spending, our biggest chunk is military and defense, right? I said 700 billion, this says 676 billion. I was guesstimating. All right. And again, if we want to cut from something, we've got to cut from probably one of these programs here, right? Whether it be these big programs on the mandatory side or the discretionary side of defense. Because again, you can't just stop going out to eat once a week at a fast food restaurant and save a ton of money, right? You've got to cut from the biggest expenditures. And those of you that have a budget, you pay for gasoline and you pay for cell phones and you pay for car insurance. Like, well, car insurance is expensive, but you have to have it. That's kind of the similarity of the mandatory spending for the government as compared to you. Okay, so where do these taxes come from? These taxes come from, all right, basically you and I. Here's your individual income tax. For you guys, that's probably 10% of your paycheck, right? It comes from you. These payroll taxes also come out of your paycheck. That's going to be 6.2% Social Security, another 1.45% from Medicare. But again, the money comes from us. All right. Some people like to claim that we can tax corporations. Again, they don't collect a huge amount of money. And then you have some other taxes in there too, involving like some international finance and excise tax and a whole bunch of other really, really, really small taxes in there. So again, you're stuck with that. Okay, we already pay all the taxes. Do we raise them? That's not popular. I got to get elected to do that too, right? Do we cut spending? Again, not popular. Or do we keep things the same? If you come out down with those three options, you've got to pick one. A lot of politicians are pretty apprehensive to do something that is either raising taxes or cutting spending from somewhere. All right. Now, for all the things the government does, that's pretty good. They do some things that are also criticized. Um, Again, we've talked about some of the challenges, especially with income redistribution stuff, unemployment insurance, and even some welfare programs that might, in some cases, lead to incentivizing not going to work. Right? People can take advantage of the system, and that stuff occurs. And people that gets people frustrated, right? Our taxes are high, we're going into debt, people are taking the money and they're not using it the way they should be. That's a challenge of the program. Okay. And in some cases too, if the government does too much stuff, it can raise the price of goods and services. We didn't really talk about that too much in this particular unit, but This is like talking about preventing pollution and things like that. If we get too extreme in raising the rules or creating rules, um, the price of goods and services would eventually go up. And there's regulations for all sorts of things. I'm just using that pollution as an example that we talked about with externalities. Okay, so let's talk about kind of the process of determining a budget, which for the government is not necessarily a very streamlined process. So it's an 18-month process. And basically, notice the years that I put in there. I put the years just to try to help you visualize what's going on. So as of December last year, okay, the president comes up with a budget to propose to Congress. All right. If you click on this budget, I believe it is over. That doesn't work. Anyway, I believe that it is over 200 pages. Okay. So anyway, he presents that to the House and the Senate. The House and the Senate debate it as a law. Okay, and notice when they're doing this from, they're doing it from a period of about 9 months here, where they're going to try to figure out what they're going to decide. Now, keep in mind, President Trump was supposed to come up with this, obviously, in December. He did. Congress hasn't even really talked about it with the whole COVID stuff, and so they're not going to hit their date of September 25th. In fact, I haven't heard anything in the news about the budget at all. The odd part about it is too is President Trump. He may not be the president next year, but he's coming up with the proposed budget for the next year. Okay, so anyway, if they change just $1 as we change, they're putting this into law. If they change $1, they've got to send it back to the other chamber of Congress and they got to revote. Okay, the president's got to approve it, and then our fiscal year starts in October and ends in September, which that should say 2021. All right. Now, if you guys follow our Congress, you know that they don't agree on basically anything. So really, they've kind of just stopped the dog and pony show, and they don't even debate anything anymore. They really just kind of say we're never going to agree on anything. We're just going to leave it alone and go as is, which can be frustrating. Obviously, that's not on the in the front of everybody's minds right now with the COVID stuff, but that is how things are supposed to happen. Which people can rightfully so get frustrated with how things are handled too, because some people would say that the government's not doing their job. Okay, that's what I've got for. Oh, sorry, last word: budget deficit. We've mentioned it a bunch of times. Write it in your notes. That's when we have to borrow money. And we got to pay interest on those loans. We mentioned it. We didn't write it. Okay. I hope things are going well. We're down to basically, 3 more videos left. We got the final next week. I'll give you instructions for that coming up on probably day 35, day 36, and get you the study guide, and we'll keep moving forward here. Okay, don't hesitate to ask questions. You can still get work turned in. Just make sure you're knocking it out if you need to. Have a good day. We'll talk soon.